Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is education. On the conversation about education this week, I want to talk about my perspective on uncertainty. And I think that uncertainty is one of those things you don't realize that your orientation around uncertainty, how it impacts your ability to navigate in the complexities of day-to-day life. And I think sometimes we give ourselves this false illusion of certainty when we have routines and rituals that are predictable. We assume that predictability is something that we can count on. And so when the rug gets pulled from under our feet, that can be a really very stressful, very discombobulating experience if we haven't come to terms with the fact that there are certain aspects and elements of life that are going to be intrinsically uncertain. And so I want to just quickly have that conversation to help you manage and mitigate some of the, ripple effects of that. Just talking a little bit about how I have managed and have dealt with the ripple effects of uncertainty in my life. And so I think for me, having been raised in a very small town with a lot of predictability, a lot of routine, I really wasn't all that familiar with a life that was uncertain. So I didn't really deal with a lot of instability growing up. I had a fairly stable sort of foundation, like I knew what to expect. And so in my adult life, I think as you're starting to push towards goals that are a little bit more steep, or you're starting to become more autonomous and more independent, you start to realize like how much effort it takes, like just how much energy is required to maintain a sense of stability. And even if you maintain it, like you don't realize like it can sometimes be a bit of a struggle. There's resistance with maintaining stability in our lives. I just want to talk a little bit about the things that can create uncertainty in our lives. I think that world events, so even now, growing up and even as I started out my career, globalization was just this magical word. It was like the thing that was going to resolve a lot of the issues at that present time, whether it was geopolitical issues, socioeconomic issues. Having sort of borderless markets was really going to be something that created a lot of opportunity for everyone. And even in some of my career paths, I had a career as a talent manager. And we thought about, well, we have all of these different locations across the world. Like, why don't we globalize our recruitment management? Why don't we give people access to one another across markets? That ended up being a really inventive, a really great idea. But then with all of that openness comes uncertainty, because you're not just subject to the rules and regulations of your specific country. You have to be open to recognizing that introducing that flexibility will create a certainty, because is it going to clash with the rules and regulations abroad? Is there going to be like different cases that we didn't quite foresee? Like, what are some of the unknowns and the unexpected things that can come out of having sort of this globalized way of doing things, this globalized way of sort of just maneuvering through life? And even when we think about the news, my background, I did a lot of like the ethics of journalism in my undergraduate degree, and I recognized that like it really wasn't very followed even back when I was doing my undergraduate degree. And now I think about just how we've taken journalism back. Like when we think about TikTok, when we think about these social media platforms that give us an opportunity to disclose and to provide our own perspective on what's happening on the ground. It's very hard for, conglomerates and for media channels to control the narrative. And I think that creates a lot of uncertainty, because it's not just this one narrative that you didn't have any alternatives to consider, or choosing from one or two narratives. There's just many different voices in the ether for you to pay attention to. So what do you pay attention to, right? Like, how do you find your way clarity if you're seeking clarity amidst sort of this knowledge era where everyone has their own hot take and everything? And so I wanted to have that conversation on some of the uncertainty that takes place. And I don't think that it's about ruling out uncertainty. I think that if we can hold space for uncertainty, we can hold values, opinions, positions, while also giving ourselves the opportunity to reposition, to repivot. I don't think we need to have absolute truths and be completely confident in the direction that we're taking. I think we can be as confident as we are with the information that we're provided. And then when we're given new information or better information, when we're better informed, make different decisions. And so when I think about uncertainty, I think that it's about really establishing understanding. Like with uncertainty, you need to really find yourself a place where you understand as much as you're going to with the information that you've been provided. And then with that understanding, you decide, how do I move forward? Recognizing that your move is still subject to lots of unknowns, right? And a lot of life is about basing our decisions on corroborated truths. And so what's a corroborated truth? It's a truth that is the best truth that we know for now, that we expect will change even more information becomes available. And so I think that when we hold information within this light, like this is corroborated, this is as good as it gets for right now, but I'll keep my ear on the ground, I'll keep listening out to see if whether or not there's nuance or there's added elements that should play into the truth that are driving the decisions that I'm making so far. But if you're so anchored in a truth being one thing or the other, then you can miss getting the insights and the different, I guess, signals that tell you that maybe you're not, maybe being so strong in your position isn't the right move. And so I think a lot about how uncertainty has layered my ways of being in life. And I recognize that if I hold space for uncertainty, I can adapt and I can build plans against it. And so it doesn't mean that I am shaky on the choices that I make, or that I'm shaky or indecisive on the courses that I would like my life to go through, or the goals that I'm pushing towards. But it is acknowledging that I can't be so confident that I'm going to get where I want to go in the time that I want to get there, and with the path that I have in mind. I can't dictate the elements, the factors that are going to play into what happens between here and there, and what happens between now and then. And I have to just hold space for that. I have to, first of all, stay in alignment. So with what I know now, I can make a point to outline the decisions that I want to make with that information, and then set myself a path. So I can still plan, I can still put my energy in the buckets where I feel like I want my energy to go there, but I make room for life, right? You make room for life to happen, because life is not something that you can dictate. I mean, what my life has taught me, and for a while I thought that I could, right? So there, for a while I had enough stability in my life, and I think a lot of my stability was inherited stability from the struggles that my parents had faced. But then when I was breaking off on my own, I realized like there was a lot of effort put up front to build a foundation of stability, and building my own foundation of stability against the goals that I was pushing towards. I mean, it was quite the feat. It wasn't something that I was able to accomplish, and it's still something that I'm pushing towards. It's still sort of a work in progress. And then you realize to what extent you take stability for granted. And I think that especially in the Western nations, we take stability for granted a lot, despite the fact that there's a lot of instability happening around the world because of the decisions that are made by leaders in our part of the ether, right? In our part of the world. So at what point do we recognize, will that uncertainty kind of come back on us, you know? So I think about that often, recognizing that we all have the tools, we all have the ability to adapt and align our choices to the things that we want in life, where we see ourselves going in life, making room, making space for uncertainty. But if you're so confident that you're going to get to where you're going in the way that you think that you're going to get there, and then uncertainty strikes in some way, shape, or form, it throws you a curveball and you're unable to bounce back because it's so debilitating, and that's going to be really hard. And I think it's going to be really hard for you to manage through life with that attitude, because uncertainty is something that we all need to sort of develop muscle around sort of managing. And so that's my hot take around uncertainty. I think uncertainty, for a lot of us, we don't recognize it, we don't feel it, we don't experience it. And I think that that's sort of a disconnect from the real life. I think lots of life is very uncertain in different ways. It can be uncertain because of the people in our lives. I mean, we can be so confident in specific people in our lives, and then we experience different betrayals, or we find different truths out that tell us that like our confidence was maybe misplaced. It can be just the people, places, and experiences that we have in our life. And so for me, like I think a lot about like the things that I was so confident was going to happen, and then when I let life happen, like they happen just a little bit differently, still in alignment with what I was looking for, but not necessarily what I envisioned. And I think that making room for uncertainty gives you the ability to be realistic, and also gives you the opportunity to deal with just some of the ways that life will surprise you. And so that's what I wanted to come on here and talk about. I wanted to talk a little bit about finding ways to create understanding in uncertainty, and how I have found a way to do that. And I think that holding on to truths loosely, so like me banking on something being true, isn't necessarily to such the extent that if something shows me that it's not entirely true, that I'm going to be completely debilitated. Like I make room for that truth to grow, to change, to shift, to be disproven or discounted. And if that happens, then I'm looking for the information that will help redirect what I anchor on, essentially, right? Because I do think that uncertainty is something that exists even in the beliefs that we carry, even in the values that we carry. Like there can be a certain degree of uncertainty because of how they've been framed to us. And maybe when we deal with real life, we challenge those beliefs, those values, or we find that they're reinforced by life around us. But still, like until you really take the things that you believe, or the things that you're pushing for, and you allow them to be pressured by life and by the uncertainty and some of the challenges that come with just day-to-day life, you never really know. And so that's okay. And I think that understanding that you'll never really know is not something to be stressed out about. It's not something to give you anxiety. It's something to just accept. It gives you the ability to roll with the punches, to ride the waves, the highs and lows that life will bring you, that it being something that is a detriment to you. And so I think that's really the basis of resilience and grit, being able to navigate uncertainty without necessarily keeping you off your stride. And of course, like, we are going to have these moments where we feel discouraged, where we feel defeated, where we feel frustrated because like what we're looking for really is much more difficult than what we were anticipating. But so long as we don't allow ourselves to be discouraged to such an extent that we stop pursuing those goals, I think it's okay to hold space for the emotions that arise when uncertainty really does limit or hinder our progress or hinder the momentum that we're trying to build. I mean, it's okay to have human emotions as it relates to it, but then we figure out ways to bounce back. We figure out ways to be nimble, to be agile, and to really be responsive to what life is showing us about the path that we thought that we needed to take to get to the things that we're hoping to attain. So that's what I want this conversation to be about. I think it's a little bit of food for thought for you. I think a lot about some of the core competencies that we require in 2026. And I think being able to deal with uncertainty is a huge, huge core competency, like by way of mental strength and resilience. And it's not something that we have like open discussions or dialogues on. We just kind of assume that people have an adaptive response to uncertainty. And I don't think a lot of us do. And I think for those of us who were raised with a lot of stability, uncertainty can be very debilitating, very challenging if we don't have the muscles to counter it. And so that was my food for thought for you. I want to hear your perspective. Like, what's your hot take on uncertainty? How do you manage it? How do you find healthy and adaptive ways to be responsive to it? How do you cultivate agility, bounce back power? How do you hold truths and hold beliefs in such a way that when they're disproven, or if you find that there's like elements that we're missing, how can you add to that by way of your mental frame? And how do you leverage that to continue to push forward on the things that matter most to you? So those are some of the questions that I wanted to put out to you in the ether, some things that you should think about, and then come back here and share your perspective on it. And just so you know, we do host workshops that talk about these kinds of things, cultivating self-mastery and how we create meaning and fulfillment as we drive through life, right? And have a life that is purpose-driven. And I think having a life that is purpose-driven is really getting clear on some of these core tenets that really do make the fabric of a meaningful and fulfilling life. And so I think having a certain degree of focus, of clarity, having a growth mindset, focusing on development, those are some of the core fundamentals that we do offer in our paid program. So definitely check those out. And we do also provide parent-child workshops because we think that focusing on leadership happens even when we're young. It's not something that happens when we become adults and enter the workforce. Leadership competencies can be developed from a very young age. And so we believe that having a core sense of leadership quotient is focused on cultivating 4 core competencies, and that's autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept. So definitely check out our workshops. We have them on our website. I'll give you the URL here. If you're still here, definitely subscribe. Every subscription definitely helps. Follow us, and I look forward to chatting with each and every one of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.